listening to The New Paris. I'm your host, Lindsay Tremuta. It started with gâteau and continues this episode with, well, actually more cake and pastry and chocolate too. For part 2 of my focus on sweets, I'm joined once again by an old friend of the show whose first book, Sweet Paris, was released earlier this year. My conversation with Frank Adrian Barron took place in my apartment, so you'll have to excuse any wood floor echoes and quite possibly the occasional cat meow. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the show in my house, Frank.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
You probably remember you came on the show in the first season, and I believe we were both sweating to death during that experience.
I climbed about 2,000 steps to like a Chambre de Bonne studio, right? What year was that?
Do we even know what time is from the before times? I think it was 2017.
It was another lifetime ago.
It was another lifetime
ago.
Yes,
I do remember. I have fond memories of that sweaty podcast.
But a lot has changed since then. First of all, we're December 2022. That's a long time from when we first chatted. I know what you're up to regularly, but our listeners do not. And we have a lot to talk about because both in terms of your personal news and also, this being December in Paris, there's a lot of very delicious things we can be talking about. So, yeah. So, and I can even say that yesterday I gave one of my tours, and at Popolini, they have the crème de marron choux back on the roster.
The best.
So I figure, why don't we start off with something seasonal, and just tell me sort of like, now that we're December, what are the things you're looking forward to eating?
Well, obviously,
we might have a cat meowing also in
somebody else has an opinion on that. I'm going to try to compete with. Well, of course, you know that we're entering into Bûche de Noël season, which is always exciting because it's so wonderful to see how all the different pastry houses compete with each other every year to sort of outdo each other on what is going to be presented on the Christmas table. And luckily, I think you and I both have had the chance to kind of preview a few. So I'm quite excited about all the different varieties. My favorite flavor for December, of course, is chestnut. And I love marron glacé because we talk about that all the time, candied chestnut. However, one of the standouts for me this year was the chocolate bûche de Noël from Mathieu Carlin at the Creole.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. That was astounding.
It had just so many layers of different chocolate iterations, and I kept calling it an ode to chocolate because it had so first of all, the mousse inside, I think you can remember, had been steeped in chocolate, kind of like tea, he said. And I learned a new word actually during the presentation of that bûche de Noël, which was gruet.
Yeah, the gruet are like the little nibs or...
So I was having a conversation with him about like how we would call those cacao nibs, and he was chuckling at that. But I don't think I'd heard them called gruet before, so that was fun.
And also I believe it's sort of like... An all-chocolate bûche can be super overwhelming, and you might think, like, at the end of a holiday meal, do you really want something that's going to be a brick in your stomach? And I'm sure you feel the same way I do, which is that it was so nuanced and not heavy because he's using, like, the finest chocolate with the most interesting character, and I couldn't believe what he had done. Note to listeners, though, you can't go get just a slice of that. This year, they're really just doing, you go in and you get you have to buy the whole bûche, but like if you're looking for something a bit extravagant, that's very extravagant.
And I believe that he had worked with a chocolate plantation in Madagascar. So it was like 100% pure Madagascan chocolate. And again, as you pointed out, it wasn't heavy and like just overly sweet. The whole combination of the mousse that had been infused with chocolate. I think there were chocolate pieces of cake inside, and then finally a biscuit made of praline on the bottom. So that was one of the best things I think I've tasted this season so far in terms of Bûche de Noël.
Because it really is like an artistic competition. People are like, do people really buy all of these? And I think it's like, it's not the point. It's like a flex.
Right. From cubed shaped Bûche de Noël to like some of them that are shaped like rocking horses.
Yeah. which was
a la
Maxime.
Maxime, yeah.
Right, right.
So just really surprising and just gobstopping how some of the things that they come out with.
Well, and also just like you have to imagine, it's like any other craft. Like there are moments of the year that lend themselves better than others to, you know, coming out with something like totally creative and out of left field. And this is that moment. This is that moment.
Back to marron and chestnut. The one chestnut pastry that I think still, which he's done multiple times throughout the years, but is back again this season, is Cédric Grolet's Mont Blanc tart.
Ooh.
Which is just next level for me. It's a layer of praline, chestnut, candied chestnut pieces, and then a blackcurrant jam.
Ooh.
And then all topped with Chantilly whipped cream and then covered in chestnut.
So it sounds super light.
Just, as the French would say, pas léger. But it's definitely a gourmet goûter if one is into chestnut.
Well, I'm sure he will have a line out the door for that.
That is the price to pay for that creation. Right. But yes.
But it's only at his pastry shop, right? Because
Yes, that was at the shop on Avenue de la Brasse. So...
Okay, because for listeners, Cédric Grolet still oversees the selection at the Maurice pastry shop, and his name is still attached to that. But where people are spending, I think, or devoting more attention is to his namesake pastry shop, which is the newest. By the way, you know we're talking about chocolate, and now I'm foaming at the mouth. Who else just opened on that street is Jade Génin, Jacques Génin's daughter.
Ah, wow. I think I did see something about like pyramid-shaped chocolates.
Yep, exactly.
Like very chic, very minimalistic. Have you tried
Not
it?
yet. So that's like, I think that's what we have to do before the holidays, Frank. There we go. We have our date.
I'm on board.
Okay, so we've got chestnut. We have some like over-the-top chocolate. You and I both love Maxime Frédéric's work at the Cheval Blanc, but obviously there are plenty of other amazing bakers in, you know, much more accessible spaces and places, and we're going to get to that. But obviously, if we're talking about all these things, and I'm talking to you as a baker right now, it's because you did it like a thing this year. You came out with a book.
Did I?
You did.
Yes, I did.
I mean, it's funny that it came out this year because I feel like it's been the project that has defined the last 2 years almost for both of us since, you know, obviously I saw the making of, I got to taste test and hold some light.
Yeah, you came over and were like, you know, got to be a grip on a few of our shoots.
That's right.
And got to be an extra on some of our like Paris kind of like Paris mise en scènes.
Yes.
For the fall chapter, I think.
But I think it's a good time for us to talk about this now on the podcast because the December winter or the winter season of this book is just divine. So to give people a little bit of background, it's obviously a cookbook, but it's more than that. It's a window into your life as a baker in Paris and how you even got started with baking because, you know, people often think that you were, you know, fresh out of Ferrandi and, you know, but like you're among...
If only.
Well, I mean, maybe you didn't want to do that, but like, you know, you're a very talented self-taught baker. And you've taken all of those... all that practice and the traditions that you love in France and, you know, set out to write the book. So what was important to you when you were doing Sweet Paris? Like, what was the key message you wanted to get across?
Oh, wow. For me, I really, when we started out with the concept and just wanting to do this book, I really wanted to celebrate the seasonal way of eating that I learned when I first moved here in 2012, because that was so outside of how I had grown up that I think it was such a culture shock to me when at this point, you've heard this story a million times, and the book starts out with this story, which is very much real, that as a native Southern Californian, when I moved here in the winter of 2012, it was snowing. The city was absolutely magical and beautiful. And of course, I was just like, stopping every 2 minutes to photograph a random corner in Paris or a bridge or a frozen fountain. And I was absolutely in heaven when we first moved here, but couldn't seem to wrap my head around the fact that I couldn't find something as simple as a strawberry in the grocery stores. And when I had asked about it, I was told that it wasn't the season for strawberries. And I think I was like really just gobsmacked by that and just like, wow. And one particular saleswoman at like a Monoprix was like, Monsieur, like you have to wait until May or June for your strawberry. And so I remember just kind of being wowed by that, and that sort of now, of course, understand the concept of seasonality, and it's a celebration of that and wanting to. So cut to today, like I just get so excited when we are in chestnut season, or it's clementines from Corsica are back at the markets, and it's so exciting to celebrate that and know that it's temporary and it's ephemeral. One of the most ephemeral fruits, I guess, that I love the most is a Mirabelle plum, which we wait for, and it comes at the end of August into the beginning of September, and it's a very short season, so everything is like Mirabelle tarts and Mirabelle cakes and Mirabelle jam with your morning tartine. So I think that sort of was what I really wanted to celebrate in the book was, of course, specifically baking with these beautiful seasonal ingredients.
Well, it's funny you mention strawberries and being from Southern California. I think that's probably, I mean, it goes a long way in explaining why you were so accustomed to having access to like incredible produce all year round because of the climate. I mean, it's just, maybe you do find in season ingredients there that you just wouldn't find here because of, Southern California is a very different place. So maybe in like Portugal, you'd find certain fruits or vegetables available longer. I don't know. What is sort of the equivalent climate to Southern California?
I mean, actually, it's funny that you bring up Portugal because I think that Lisbon and California are sort of on the same axis points.
Well, which part of California, though?
Well, I think it would be Southern California, so like LA County,
right? Okay.
San Diego. I completely can be wrong about that, but I personally, as a native Californian, when I'm in Portugal, specifically Lisbon and the Algarve, I do feel climate-wise and weather-wise, I feel right at home. And something about seeing trees filled with figs and oranges just laden, so rich there, that it does definitely remind me of growing up in San Diego in Southern California.
And so that American tradition obviously played into the book because, you initially became known for your sort of love of American cakes and, coffee cakes and buns and American style layer cakes. But what you did with this book is really more of a bridge, like a cultural bridge, a mix between, American style recipes, but with French ingredients, basically the best of what you can get here. And then, of course, the seasonality and everything you did in this book, like even the things that the recipes that maybe look or feel a little bit more American are so elegant in a French way. So what do you think it is about these two baking cultures that worked in this case? Because often you would say, well, maybe Japan and France have a more similar baking or gastronomic tradition that they could more, they could better align with one another. And American and France seems to be less of an obvious fit.
Well, I think that one of the things that happened for me, because part of my backstory is that I didn't grow up baking per se, and I didn't really start baking until I moved to Paris. And of course, the background to that was that I personally, as you mentioned, I'm a cake lover, and I just couldn't find layer cakes when I started to kind of get the craving to have a chocolate layer cake with cream cheese frosting, or I don't know, just a classic vanilla cake with buttercream. Those were the things that, and I have to say that I didn't start craving those things until after almost a year of being here. That first year in Paris, I was so excited and happy to dive into all the French pastry, and I just wanted to try everything. And I really did make an effort to go out and try as much as I could because I thought I was only going to be here temporarily. Cut to 10 years later, and we're still here. But at that time, I was very much trying to be a good expat in Paris who's going to go out and find like le meilleur baguette and try it, or try a tarte trépaisienne and try. So there's, as you know, there's just hundreds, thousands, I don't know, different pastries from all the different regions. But I tried my best to eat as many as I could. And I think that is why, after a year of sort of doing that, I really started to had my fill and I started to crave an American style sweet, especially with coffee, as we're wont to do. And I just really couldn't find it. Yeah, there were a few small places, I think, throughout the city that were maybe doing cupcakes or things like this, but I never saw layer cakes or like a coffee cake with streusel topping or a bundt cake or these kinds of things. So that is how I started to bake because I realized I had to, if I wanted those things, I needed to make them for myself.
But for someone who had little experience baking, I mean, you came out pretty strong out of the gate with like some natural talent.
I don't know if you remember some of my first creations. Let's just say a lot of broken bundt cakes. A few disheveled layer cakes were part of the mix.
Were there tears?
There was a lot of buttercream tears, and I just kept going. As you know, you're told to do once something doesn't work out, just try again. And I kept trying, and I went onto YouTube and I watched videos of how to properly like butter and flour a pan, how to properly level a cake so that it doesn't fall over when you fill it with something. So I was just testing, and I had the time to test and take my time to just keep going and practicing and practicing. So yes, though there were many, many cake fails that I wish I actually had shared on social media back then, because it isn't always perfect in my world. No. And there are lots of, as I said, cake fails, but eventually I did get better. And I think one of those things that, going back to your question, is that, of course, like many people who come to Paris and visit a pastry shop, I'm just going to choose one at random. Okay, not so random. Pierre May.
Okay.
I remember even before I lived in Paris, visiting his tiny shop on Rue Bonaparte in the 6e and just being wowed by what I was seeing. His pastries were little tiny works of art. And I know that one of his monikers is the Picasso of pastry, but everything was just so beautifully done and so meticulous. And there were just, for example, his macarons, which were sprayed with like edible glitter, or beautiful rose petals with this tiny little raspberry or a fraise de bois that was placed just perfectly. And I think it was those details that inspired me to want to try to, I don't know, jazz up a traditional layer cake and to kind of bring some of that French elegance that you see in all of the pastry shops here or even your neighborhood boulangerie, where you'll see a beautiful, simple, in summer, strawberry tart, but it's just done so beautifully and elegantly. So I think that was something that I picked up and wanted to incorporate once I started to get into baking, that I was kind of creating those American flavors, but yes, as you pointed out, using some French ingredients and also trying to be inspired by what I was seeing in all the beautiful pastry shops.
So also flavor combinations and, the use of certain fruit that maybe you wouldn't use in American baking, at least not traditional baking. But it's not just about elegance in terms of the aesthetics of the cake or whatever it was that you were baking, but the book covers the lifestyle element. Like, again, a lot of the photos are shot in your home and people love your home, and, getting a moment to imagine what it's like to live in a Parisian apartment. So do you think that, the reason these things, the pastry arts or having people around a table are so powerful to an American audience is because it involves so much more than what's actually on the table, right? Like the selection of flowers if you're going to have people over, or the tableware, or, so was that sort of like a non-negotiable for you with this book?
Absolutely. I think just to compare or to give another example of what you just talked about is, so my husband doesn't drink coffee. That's a very big battle that we have all the time. And I'm never going to win. And he just is not interested and doesn't like to drink coffee. So I'm a big coffee drinker and love to go out to get my coffee. And I love to go meet a friend at a coffee shop and sit together, chat, catch up over coffee and cake, of course. And he's always asking me like, what is it? Why can't you just have your coffee at home? Why do you need to go out to the cafe and get a coffee, etc.? And I just try to explain to him like, the coffee is sort of just like the sidebar. The main element that I'm after and that I'm enjoying or that I'm looking for is that moment of conversation, of meeting a new person, meeting a new friend, chatting. And it's always wonderful to do that over a beautifully poured cup of coffee and a delicious piece of cake. I mean, you and I met at a coffee shop.
This is true. This is true.
Let's not forget that that's what brought us together and our mutual love of being coffee shop lurkers.
And yet we're having tea right now.
And yet, yes, we are. -2 in Paris today, right. It feels like. I think, and related to the book, and what another celebration was of course, bringing people together. The concept of a table and just having people around and sharing something delicious, but having that moment.
Cat lurker.
Fur friends are allowed to.
Yes, they're involved in the making of this podcast.
They are, and they're allowed to be at the table as well. So I think that getting people together, and it's always wonderful to share good food, and in this case, delicious dessert.
So aesthetics are important. Obviously, not everyone is a natural host. I think you and some of our friends are just naturally gifted. I don't want to say entertainers. That sounds like too performative, but
you don't want to hear me sing.
No, but just like you kind of thrive on all the elements of bringing people together and making your home a welcoming place, which is so important. And if anyone has read Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering, that it's so crucial to relationship building and to creating these sort of like memorable moments together. How did you try to make that less intimidating to readers? Like, how did you go about it in the book in proposing, beyond the recipe?
Well, one of the things we decided to add into the book early on was I thought it would be really fun and fabulous to incorporate seasonal flowers alongside all the chapters to sort of introduce the idea of, yes, entertaining, and I love flowers. And so I thought that just went hand in hand to talk about what flowers were in season in summer and what are my favorites and how can you kind of like incorporate that into having a goûter when you have friends come over, or even, again, just for yourself. I oftentimes buy flowers just for myself and bring them home to have them. And for example, in summer, I think that we talked about the pivoine or the peony being in season. And I think that was very important to me to want to incorporate all of those elements that you just talked about going into creating a beautiful moment at home. So you have this beautiful cake that you made, and I always think about what am I going to serve it on and what, dessert forks am I going to bring out for it. And again, this sounds very extra, and it is. And some people love that. And I am one of those people. I love to go to the flea markets in Paris and hunt for a beautiful cake stand that I know I'm going to use for whether it be a dinner party where I'm having friends come over and going to take it out for winter or something that's more summery. And I think those are the elements we also talked about, like how to shop a brocante in France, what to look for, what I like to look for. And that with the flowers, I think kind of all came together to sort of paint this picture of like, here are some of the elements I like to do when I have someone over for
whatever
a
it
chocolate
is.
Bun cake.
Right. And it doesn't have to be a bun cake. You obviously have recipes that are of varying levels of difficulty, actually. I mean, some are very involved, some are much, much simpler. I think one of my favorite images and therefore recipes is the one of the mousse in the champagne coupes, like the vintage champagne coupes, because it's just so it doesn't take like, I don't know, 10 steps. Maybe it takes like 2 steps. I don't recall offhand, but
this one comes together really, really quickly. You're right.
yeah. And, so I think what's good about what you did is that there's like something for everyone. And there are people I know, I've seen, you've had readers who have sent you messages and photos of like, I did it. I'm using your, whatever icing recipe. I'm trying to get better at putting things together. But I think there's a lot of fear in baking, which is just sort of silly. I mean, it's supposed to be something pleasurable, right?
Yes, I agree. And I think that's why I even hesitate to call myself a baker. I mean, that's a whole other podcast about imposter syndrome that we can talk about. But when you mentioned even earlier about how, Ferrandi and Le Cordon Bleu, we live in Paris. This is the capital of pastry to many. And I, have seen just astounding work when it comes to pastry and dessert. And so I think about being self-taught and talking about how things seem complicated, and they really, especially this kind of baking for me, which is very approachable and not doesn't require 200 degrees in patisserie. So
Right. Well, and I think that, if I can give you another compliment, because I guess we're just all about, celebrating you in this half hour, is that there are a lot of actually very talented, successful chefs in Paris who didn't go to cooking school. So on both pastry and, cooking, on the cooking side, you have people who figured out their own way in, and so you don't always have to be the person who spent, I mean, to give a counterpoint, you have Maxime Frédéric, who left to go into pastry training at like 13 or 14 years old. I mean, this is a very different life path, but that doesn't mean there aren't, talented little pastry artists lingering in among all of us. Not me personally, but in theory.
Yes, I think what draws me into that world is, I jokingly always tell you about calling myself an aesthete. That's, my background and our history. And just, I think with the culinary arts, there's that's part of it, especially with desserts and baking. It's baking something and making it look beautiful and appetizing. As we talk about all the time in France, here is one of the places in the world where they like to eat with their eyes first.
That's absolutely true. Don't you talk about this in the book, the lèche vitrine?
Oh, yes.
Right, window.
The art of window licking.
Right, which really just means like window shopping, but the metaphor.
You don't actually lick the window, or in some
I really
cases,
hope people are not. They might need a trip to the hospital after that.
At Mori Yoshida, that's one place I might actually lick the windows.
Good segue into some of your favorite sweets or sweet shops. You can pick whichever way you want to answer it. But, we've talked about, let's try to stay away from the people we've mentioned. We've mentioned Cédric Rollet. We've mentioned Mathieu Carlin at the Crillon. We've mentioned Maxime Frédéric at Cheval Blanc. You've now dropped Mori Yoshida, who we love in the 7th, and Pierre Armé, who's, everywhere. Who else?
Yeah, these are, I guess we're talking about some of the more well-known chefs here in Paris. There's so many beautiful, smaller shops that are doing just as beautiful and delicious things here. And of course, I know we both love Mamiche. I mean, that's one of my favorite boulangeries, and it's home to one of the best vanilla choux in Paris.
Which, I mean, I don't know if inflation is going to get at this, but like it costs €1 for a giant choux.
Very satisfyingly filling.
Oh, wow.
Vanilla choux. And I don't know what is in that cream, but it's just like a cloud of heaven. So that's one place that I'd like to go for myself, just to pick up something. If we're going back into the world of chocolate and it's the holiday season, I do like Alain Ducasse chocolate. Yeah,
you've been a big proponent.
I know he's not one of the small guys if we're talking about big names. I know he's a big name, but his praliné chocolate is still just one of my favorites. And I love everything he does. His passion fruit coconut praliné in particular is still one of my favorite things to just like the tablette to just go and chomp on in an afternoon. So that is still one of my favorites. There is a Japanese cheesecake shop over by the Opera Garnier. I forget the name of the street it's on, but it's called Takumi.
Oh, yes.
Have you been?
I walked by it. I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so Japanese cheesecake, it's a thing, and they're just making them fresh just all day long. And they come in different flavors. You can actually, right now in winter, get a chestnut cheesecake, and they're fluffy, kind of like the Japanese fluffy pancakes. They're beautiful. They're all sitting in the window. You can see them.
Do you think they don't use cream cheese? What do they use?
I don't know actually.
It's probably they're airy, right?
They're very airy and fluffy and delicious, and I absolutely love them. But they also make a few other like smaller pastries. Actually, I hate to go back to chestnut, but they do make a chestnut tart, which is cream cheese and chestnut, and it's on the base of like a crunchy almond biscuit. And that is also excellent.
Oh my God.
We're segueing into Japanese things.
You also love mochi.
Of course. And actually, I think we had this conversation about like one of your sort of like last dessert meals, which I thought was a very dark question.
Yes, that was going to be my final question. Like, what is your last supper dessert?
Oh, I wish I had 3 choices.
Fine. All right. Well, this isn't like
If I'm just taking it back to mochi, that is one of my favorite sweets in the world to eat.
So wild.
And one in particular, it's called Ichigo Daifuku. And I have had an Ichigo Daifuku in Tokyo, and it's basically a mochi with red bean paste inside, anko, and then in the center of the mochi is a strawberry.
Oh, wow.
And of course, this is seasonal in summer, but it's just the layers of that rice dough with the red bean paste and then getting to the strawberry in the center. So for me, the Ichigo Daifuku would be one.
Can you get that here?
So Maison de Mochi actually does make sometimes that version, but all of their mochi at Maison de Mochi is just amazing.
And that's a mix of French and like she'll incorporate some French flavors like chestnut,
yes.
But it really is pretty traditionally Japanese in the way she's making it, right?
Yeah, it's a traditional Japanese method, but she does incorporate some very French flavors.
And she's French.
Yeah, like pear in the fall and all sorts of beautiful French, just like the way I incorporate in my cake baking using Mirabelle jam, for example, in a layer cake. She's doing something similar, but with mochi.
Okay, so we've got mochi is going to be at your last supper feast.
My last buffet.
Buffet of desserts.
Buffet. Definitely the Daifuku mochi. Secondly, I guess I'm going to have to keep it classic and stick with the vanilla classic birthday celebration cake.
Oh, wow. Okay.
With vanilla buttercream and add rainbow sprinkles, obviously. This is just, to me, I've eaten so many cakes, as you can imagine, and I still go back to being afraid people are going to think I'm so boring by saying that my favorite cake is just a well-made vanilla cake with vanilla buttercream frosting.
I don't think people think that's boring because they like make candles out of it and lip gloss. Well, so I'm pretty sure it appeals to a lot of people.
That last time I was home in California, in fact, I went to a coffee shop that was offering a birthday cake latte. So I was like, okay, wow. So this is definitely a thing. I'm not alone in my love of just classic birthday cake. On the East Coast, I would definitely go pick up a slice at Magnolia Bakery.
Oh, wow. You're really traditional.
Very. And on the West Coast, definitely Susie's Cakes in San Francisco.
Okay.
Just, these are 2 places that I feel, to me, just taste like when I was growing up, a cake my mom would make for my birthday. So that's sort of like those are my 2 recommendations for like classic vanilla cake.
Okay.
I know that there's going to be a lot of naysayers out there about Magnolia, and I know that they may have had their time, and I know that there are other bakeries in New York, but I still stand by a slice of vanilla birthday cake from Magnolia.
Also, they're still open, so they're doing something right.
They must be doing something
right. Okay, what's your third? This is tough, huh?
Ooh, so I would probably have to say something with kaya.
Oh, really? I was gonna guess Mont Blanc for you.
Oh, well, I mean, if I'm having to limit it to 3, and also,
excuse me, wow.
This, I was just in Indonesia and for the month of October, and I did try a layer cake that was filled with kaya jam.
And kaya is a plant.
Kaya is a plant, and kaya jam, it's like an egg jam used with coconut. And it's so delicious. It's very popular in Southeast Asia, Singapore, kaya toast. And so this cafe that I went to in Jakarta had a kaya cake, and it was like pandan cake filled with kaya jam covered in buttercream.
Oh my God.
I know. It was a whole thing, and I just like lost my mind in this cafe, and I was just like, this is something I have to recreate at home. So I have not tried to recreate it yet because pandan is, I don't know how difficult it is to be, I guess.
Well, you could probably work with the ladies from the hood.
Yes. I could probably contact Pearl and ask her where
and Ken Lee, yeah. So they, if you are interested in not baking but want to just get something with kaya, they have kaya donuts at Nonet, which is the banh mi shop across the street from the hood. And the hood, they have pandan cake, and you can get it with a side of kaya to spread on top. And I discovered, and then now the girls know to like slip that to me. And if I try to leave without having pandan cake, they're like, are you sure you had your experience that you were really looking for? So yes. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to ask you, though, because you've now named 3 things that are not French. So what is your what is your 4th French dessert on the feast of end of days?
Well, okay, I will definitely choose the fraisier from Mori Yoshida.
Wow, okay.
I just can eat that fraisier all day, every day. And it is, again, speaking of seasonality, to take it back in a nice way, it is not available all year round because it's strawberries, but it's when it's in season and when it's there, it's just my favorite French pastry. So
he does so many beautiful things. I mean, but you're right, he makes an excellent fraisier. I've had a very good one at Karl Marletti as well, who's also sort of on the left bank. But yeah, no, those are good. Those are 4 solid ones.
I included the fraisier in my summer chapter in the book, and I, tried to be inspired by the flavors of the Mori Yoshida, but making it in a more American size, let's say.
Well, I think given that we are early December and the holidays around the corner, and I'm a big proponent of buying books for gifts because, well, it's the kind of stuff that, I don't know, gives more value than, something else. So people can get Sweet Paris online. If you're in Paris, I know they can find it at Gadignani, W.H. Smith, it's called Smith & Sons now, the Red Wheelbarrow, Shakespeare and Company, I'm sure. And what about in the U.S.? Who are some of the stores that are carrying it if people want to go in person? I think Now Serving in L.A., there are some places in San Francisco.
I signed a bunch of copies at Kitchen Arts and Letters on the Upper East Side in New York. I know for sure they sold some copies there's a very famous small independent bookstore in the West Village.
3 Lives.
Yes, thank you. It was right at the top of my head. They were carrying the book as well. And yes, in California, I had signed some copies as well. There's a homewares and lifestyle store called Emily Joubert.
Oh, yeah.
So I signed at least 25 copies there.
And you know what? The best part about what we do is that books are very easy to get. So if your local bookstore doesn't have it in and you think that that's an oversight or they just sold out, ask for it because it really does make a difference. It doesn't take that long to get them in. Ask your bookseller. I'm sure elsewhere in Europe and in other parts of the world like Australia, the book is available as well. Frank, congratulations on Sweet Paris. 2022 is obviously for you, I think, has been a sweet year in terms of bringing this into the world, and I hope that everyone will put it under their tree or Hanukkah bush or just
merci beaucoup,
whatever they're doing.
And happy holidays to everybody and happy baking.
Happy baking. Thank you, Frank. À très bientôt. That's the show for today. As always, thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing with friends. You can find all previous episodes of the New Paris podcast wherever you stream your podcasts and on World Radio Paris. If you're enjoying these conversations, please consider picking up a copy of the New Paris book or my recent release, The New Parisienne, from your local booksellers. Until next time, à bientôt!